Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode in the history of the Monster Hunter Frontier series. Today we'll be looking at all of the forward updates from Forward 1 to Forward 5. We're officially done with all 10 of this season's updates, and you'll start to see not only more hardcore monsters, but the inclusion of additional flagship monsters and various other features as well. The design of some of these monsters are so incredibly unique, and I hope you're as eager to watch it as I am to show it to you. The previous two videos have been receiving a lot of positive reception. It makes me really happy to see more people willing to take a look at Monster Hunter Frontier and what they may have missed, instead of excluding it simply due to the fact that it's not mainline. There's always been so many rumors and discussion from Western Monster Hunter players, and honestly, this game has gotten an unjustifiably negative reception in my opinion. So far, everything I have seen and experienced has been truly phenomenal when it comes to the design of a Monster Hunter entry, and the sheer amount of content offered, even by this point in the series, is pretty nuts. I honestly can't believe we have never gotten to experience some of this content within the main releases, and here's hoping to the future, with the announcement of Monster Hunter Rise, that will see Capcom a little more receptive to the idea of bringing over some Frontier monsters. Together, we're going to look at the development of Monster Hunter Frontier, from its initial inception, to release, to the updates and expansions created for it. We'll dive into the features of the series, and try to compare the gameplay to gameplay of mainline titles. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with how intricate and interesting this game's combat was. Think old school Monster Hunter on crack. It's pretty wild, and I'm excited to show it to you. Future videos will focus on the G1 to G10 updates and finally the Z to Zenith releases. If you haven't watched my previous videos on the history of the series, I suggest you do so now. Additionally, if you enjoy these videos and want to help support the channel, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It just takes a couple of seconds and really helps boost the reach of the video to Monster Hunter fans everywhere. Today I'm joined with CeraCymmetry, who has been a large help in the creation of the Frontier history videos. I'll be leaving all of their links in the description, so if you have time, be sure to check out their YouTube channel. I'm Super Rad, and today I'm here to bring you a brief history of Monster Hunter Frontier.
Forward 1 was released April 20th, 2011 and marked the 4th anniversary of the series. One of the first big changes was renovations to various parts of Mesoporta Square. In the first video in the Frontier History series, it was mentioned that all of the footage in the square wouldn't be shown, and that's because it's hard to show all of those changes over time. Instead, on the final history video, we'll take a look at what you would consider the finished product for this game's hub area. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the other features introduced. We're going to get right into the monsters with this one, but starting with Rucodiora, a brand new Elder Dragon to be introduced into the series and the first Frontier exclusive Elder Dragon to be seen. Naturally, the developers wanted to create a truly unique experience with his inclusions, giving it the brand new magnetism ailment. If inflicted, Rucodiora had the ability to pull in or repel hunters at will. It can also summon a levitating rock that will circle around it for a limited period of time. For some reason, this monster isn't properly affected by the paralysis ailment, and whilst it can be inflicted, Rucodiora can still move around. It has multiple other moves including generic claw attacks and dragon element magnetic sweeping beams. It's incredibly original in not only its actions and ailments, but also in its design, featuring bright yellow wings with an orange gradient and large horns which can be broken up to 3 times. Ruko can be fought in a brand new area known as the Interceptor's Base, which is similar in design to the town area from Monster Hunter Dayz. Many parts of the area are destructible, and as they fall apart, the scenery of the area will change with it, with areas becoming engulfed in flames, as well as the surrounding air beginning to spark. Next on the monster list is Violent Raviente. Since the monster is still unclassified, it's not really considered to fall under any proper subspecies-esque classification. That being said, you could think of it as a sort of variant. The colour scheme of the monster has changed, with green and ivory white taking over the predominantly orange and brown. It also comes equipped with new abilities as well, such as the new Flame Breath attack that can heat up areas of the map to the point that they cause damage. Can also blind the player's vision by creating smoke around the map, and will use this as an opportunity to try and inhale or attack hunters. This change from your typical Raviente to its violent alternative is said to be due to starvation, making the monster more aggressive and ready to prey on whatever is in its path. Moving on is a unique flying wyvern similar in design to a Rathian, with a dark black and bright red colour scheme.
I'm the world's ultimate life form.
Similar to Deviljho, Unknown, Black Flying Wyvern, would invade players' hunts and come equipped with a slew of cool features, including multiple rage states. In its first phase, the monster will simply huff black smoke whilst attacking the player, but soon after will begin spouting blue and yellow flames. Finally, in its final state, Unknown's eyes will turn a bright red and the membrane on its wings will begin to have a red flame-like pattern displayed. As the monster gets angrier and transitions through these states, it will get both faster and stronger. It seems to have the ability to create both large spheres and beams of fire, and can throw the claws on its wings at hunters as projectiles, which will then regenerate. Truly, the
ultimate life form.
New hardcore monsters include hardcore breeding season Hypnocatrice, which comes with more vibrant feathers and a more aggressive demeanor. Two of the feathers creating its crest seem to be enlarged. It's incredibly erratic and now has the ability to KO hunters by releasing a pink gas underneath it. Hardcore Camu and Nono Origarin. Camu and Nono hit the gym and came back with increased muscle mass as well as various changes to facial features, such as their blue eyes, a typical change in some of the hardcore releases. They're faster and stronger than before, and their wind attacks are now considered Dragon Wind strength. Post SR100, these monsters can enter a super rage state when their partner is slayed, making them even faster and stronger than their upgrades had already made them. These new rage states also unlock additional attacks for each. Hardcore Kushala Daora, which sports a brighter, almost white body, similar to when it sheds in the Monster Hunter DOS cutscenes. It can now inflict defense down, and can create ice crystals along the ground when roaring, which will not inflict any ailments but will prevent the hunter from healing their red bar health over time. Hardcore Pink Rathian, with larger spikes and a purple hue on parts of its body as well as odd symbols and designs on the membrane of its wings. It gets access to new moves and alternatives to existing ones, such as its tail swing now functioning as a sweeping motion behind it that can poison multiple people. Finally, if Hardcore Kezu wasn't enough for you, the developers of Frontier found it fitting to have the Red Kezu subspecies receive the same upgrade. It can now shoot thunderballs in all surrounding directions and drool acid, which can inflict the defense down ailment. Now, one of the biggest and arguably most successful features introduced in Frontier within the Forward 1.5 update was the inclusion of the Guku pet that can now be acquired. Think of it as a Poogie, but instead of a pig, it was a miniature duck companion, which would gather bugs and catch fish for you while out on missions. They also had a special cooking pot minigame that allowed players to melt specific items into hardcore carves. If the player failed the minigame, their Guku would get the iconic burnt afro hairstyle that you might have seen circulating around the internet. The Guku were obtained by taking part in special duck hunting quests, in which the player would have to steal an egg from a monster and escape with it. Examples would be taking an egg from a Kongalala's tail by breaking it, or from a Tigrex's mouth by forcing it to charge into a wall. Similar to a Tamagotchi, you had to take care of your Guku, otherwise they would become unhappy and may even leave. And similar to a Pokemon, these pets had random natures which would affect what they gathered for you. If you think about how popular Poogie is within the mainline community, Gukus are equally idolized within Frontier. They quickly became the icon of the series thanks to their cute and customizable design. Now that was a lot to talk about for just one update, so let's now head over to Forward 2 and see what was added.
The flagship of the Forward 2 update, released June 29, 2011, was Gogomoa, a brand new fanged beast and a rather popular addition due to its multiple unique mechanics. It's similar to a primate and will carry its child, a Kokomoa, on its back. Hunters can actually knock the Kokomoa off to send Gogo here into a blind rage. When in this state, Gogo will become both faster and stronger, but it will also take extra damage when attacked. On top of having the attributes of a primate, it also has the abilities of a spider, having the ability to produce a silk-like substance from its palms that it can use to swing around the map. Finally, if Gogo launched itself at hunters from its webbing, players could perform a type of counter-attack. If attacked during this animation, players would gain iframes and dodge the attack, while also dealing extra damage to the monster. Gogo was the set to work towards as an entry-level player at the time, due to the inclusion of the Evasion Plus 2 skill in its armor set, an ability that became more and more crucial to Frontier as the game progressed in updates and difficulty. Development-wise, Teruki Miyashita became producer of the Frontier series within this point of the game, and was a considerable factor in the design decisions going forward from this point. This is kind of hilariously important for series quests, which were also introduced. Similar to Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, certain quests, when completed, would immediately throw the hunter into another quest, quest, but these could range from hunts to gathering/harvest quests. Now, I promise I'm not making this up, but one of these special series quests led to a fight against a purple Gogomoa who not only wielded a gun lance, but also had the face of this new producer. That's right, the Tide Island also marked its appearance in Forward 2, which was a new hunting area the players could hunt monsters like Gogomoa in. Part of the area would change depending on whether or not it was the day or night and the level of the tide. A form of flash bug that was poisonous also inhabited the island and would become aggressive towards hunters if they hit the trees that housed their nests. Luckily, they could also aggro onto monsters, allowing the ability to poison them during combat. Hardcore monsters also came with a new mechanic in this iteration. A ticket system was put in place that allowed players to unlock special hidden armor sets. These sets, when worn together, would produce a set bonus that was dependent on the weapon the hunter was currently using. Generally, this would be a damage multiplier, but some were fairly unique, such as the longsword halving spirit gauge consumption, or the greatsword getting an increase to the level 4 charge timeframe. Hardcore Akantor was one of these new monster additions, and had an unusual blue tint to its hide in comparison to the typical red that we normally see, as well as a length increase to its tusks. It can now summon giant lava pillars and use its roar to damage hunters that are close to it. Next up was Hardcore Black Diablos, which have the blue eyes you see in multiple other HC monsters, as well as a gigantic left horn. She can create high-level quakes similar to other hardcore monsters, and uses this as an opportunity to perform her digging attack, which is now much faster. Hardcore Blue Yankutku, who has an incredibly large lower jaw, which you can now use to lay pitfall traps for hunters to fall into. It's also much faster in the air compared with a traditional Yankutku. Hardcore Bulldrome, who appears older with larger, more developed tusks and a sick mohawk. It can toss chunks of the ground at hunters, but really it's still just a Bulldrome, nothing too crazy about it. Hardcore Doragirosu with large claws at the end of its tendrils, yellow webbing, and golden eyes. It takes moves from the original Berekirosu and is overall more agile. Around this time, a rare version of Dora was also released known as Phantom Doragirosu, which essentially looked like the hardcore version, but it appears permanently in its rage state. The big thing about this monster is that it revives after death with a large explosion of the dragon element, and will enter a new tier of rage, becoming stronger and faster in the process. With an upgraded moveset, it was incredibly rare to engage with, and offered items that were only used as a trophy of your accomplishment. The final hardcore addition in Forward 2 is Hardcore Gravios, which has larger, more developed spikes and muscles. The speed of its sweeping beam maneuver has been improved, and it can be incredibly dangerous if the hunter isn't ready to dodge it. With all the hardcore monsters covered, it's time to move on to Forward 3.
February 1st, 2012 marked the release of Forward 3 and 2 new monsters, but other than that, there weren't many new features to discuss. First is a brand new brute wyvern known as Abirugu, a fire element monster that could perform sweeping beams and charged short-range explosions. It was also a monster to have a double spinning tail move under its arsenal, but what made it special was that it would somehow ignore the invulnerability effect that's typically on hunters when sent flying due to damage, meaning they'd still be vulnerable for extra damage. This idea of ignoring iframes would become a regular occurrence in later monster editions within the Frontier series, and hunters would have to watch out for this in order to prevent quickly carding. Next up is Tycoon Zamaza, a brand new Carapacean entry. This was another monster that could be found on Tide Island from Forward 2 and took the appearance of a giant crab with a hammer and a scythe for either claw. Its body was covered in a dense coating of dirt, which hunters could break off by attacking individual parts of the body. Once enough dirt was broken, Zamaza would smash the floor of the cave, leading the hunter down to a second level. From here, you continued the fight, attempting to remove more dirt from its bright orange shell. Once this had been achieved, the ground would be smashed a second time, leading to the final phase. It was at this last stand that the electric blue inner shell of Zamaza was revealed, and it could now utilize thunder attacks. This was very difficult to achieve, as you could very easily kill the monster before even progressing past the first area. One new inclusion was bringing over certain items and abilities from the mainline games, such as throwing knives. Now players have the ability to use these items within Frontier. Unfortunately, there were no new hardcore monster inclusions within this update, so we can move straight on to Forward 4.
Forward 4 released May 23, 2012. Similar to how Forward 3 brought a new Brute Wyvern, Forward 4 introduced a new Leviathan to the MMO, known as Kuaru Sepusu, who was found on the highland where we first fought Gurenzuburu. Its main ability was found on the crystals that covered its body. Kuaru had the ability to amplify sunlight and lightning to stun and shock the hunter, as well as scatter the crystals to create dangerous landmines. One quest involved hunting a pair in the desert, who were able to conduct team attacks, proving a deadly combination. Speaking of, one of 2 new hardcore monsters introduced was Gurenzuburu also, with a longer horn and longer spikes over its wings and tail. It has a new AoE attack where it smashes its horn into the ground and a new charge that can inflict stun. In higher ranks, it can also add water element to its normal attacks. Secondly, hardcore Rusted Kushala looks even more rusted than the typical variant. Its main feature is a stronger roar, which required high-grade earplugs to block. Now here's the really interesting thing about Forward 4. First of all, Supremacy monsters get introduced in Forward 5, but not before hunters got a taste of what they would be like with a special invasion event featuring Unknown. It could hijack quests hunters were currently taking part in. Now Unknown most likely had a hardcore release at this point, gaining stronger tiers of wind pressure and additional small changes, but the Supremacy species was where it was at. Here's a brief explanation of the Supremacy species. Difficult. Grueling difficult was the design choice for these monsters. They're designed to be as punishing as possible and would really challenge seasoned hunters that wanted to even attempt them. They would have 2 versions of their hunts. The first was like an introduction to their battle, where if it wasn't completed in time, the monster would essentially be repelled, except this repel was considered a failed state. The second version was a shortened 20-minute hunt. Let's take a look at Supremacy Unknown now, since it was technically introduced in Season 4. It acts similarly at first to your typical Unknown, and will still transition through multiple rage states, with 6 in total. It borrows moves from monsters like the Espinaz subspecies, but upgraded to be even more challenging. Take the charged fireball move as an example. It will shoot a large fireball into the air that will split into multiple small balls that fall to the ground. However, these projectiles will actually home in on hunters unless they stick close to the monster. In its 6th rage mode, a blue aura will surround it, and it has a combo maneuver where it can launch players into the air by stomping and crushing the ground around it. After this, it roars that causes KO status. Another example is when it lifts off of the ground, producing wind with enough force that it can kill, then diving down and attacking its targets multiple times, ignoring recovery iframes. Getting hit by this combination is guaranteed instant death. While this monster typically invades quests, the Supremacy version would later be selectable as a postable hunt of its own. Okay, so we have our first taste of Supremacy monsters, but as mentioned, they weren't fully introduced until the next update. Let's move on to Forward 5 and see what's in store for us.
Forward 5 released February 6th, 2013, and it would be the final Forward update until the release of the G series. It brought with it a new flagship, 4 new hardcore monsters, and 6 new Supremacy species. Odiba Tarasu is the new flagship and an enormous flying wyvern, despite not actually having the ability to fly, that inhabited the desert. Seen as a distant relative of Acantor and Eucanalos, it attacked with its huge size and massive roars, being able to send out waves of sand and crush hunters with its body weight. It also sported an enormous, if I'm reading this right, cannon on the back of its turtle-like shell, that was able to fire sand and rock in huge chunks to harm the hunters. Most notable was the roar it used when going into rage mode, as it could quite easily one-shot hunters who weren't prepared. Both the hardcore and Supremacy species of this monster were introduced in Forward 5, which is rare to see from a brand new edition. The hardcore variation is fairly similar, with the horns having more of an orange tinge in comparison to the white of the normal version, and it has a stronger roar requiring super high-grade earplugs. Supremacy Odi, while more powerful, didn't offer much in terms of changes to the actual battle. Now for the remaining hardcore monsters, we have hardcore Beru Kirurosu and Gogumoa. Beru has 2 large spikes coming out of each talon now, and has the ability to use moves normally that used to only be available while it was in its rage state. Past SR 100, hardcore Beru can even fly into the sky and shoot a large red beam downward before having it travel horizontally across the map. The beam is incredibly large and even bigger than the monster itself. Hardcore Gogumoa now has red claws as well as the ability to throw coconuts into trees, which will explode on contact, acting as a grenade with the shrapnel spreading outward. If hit, this attack can cause both poison and sleep status ailments. It's more agile and can pull branches down from the trees using its webbing, which can hit hunters, and it has the ability to swing circularly around the map. On to the remaining and incredibly powerful Supremacy species. We have a pairing known as Aruganosu and Goruganosu. You can think of these as silver and gold Lavasioths. Aru is an ice elemental monster that has the ability to inflict paralysis, while Goru is a thunder element monster and can inflict sleep. You'll fight these Piscine wyverns together, but killing them may be tricky. Once one is on its last HP, it will simply flop around like a fish out of water, and you won't be able to finish it off until you get the partner down to the same state. Take too long and the disabled fish will begin to heal the other, so you need to be efficient in hunting these two. On top of all of this, they also had the ability to perform team attacks, which could be devastating to an unwary hunter. Supremacy Doragirosu is one of the more difficult monsters to receive the Supremacy treatment, as if simply being this variation of monster wasn't bad enough. Aside from various physical changes, it pulls moves and abilities from other forms of Doragirosu and Berukirosu, and new attacks entirely, such as lifting and launching chunks of the ground into the air before large projectiles begin to fall within a wide area. The coolest thing about it is what happens upon death. Similar to Phantom Dora, the Supremacy version will revive after death, starting with a large explosion of dragon element. It then enters a permanent rage state and is buffed with increased speed, attack range, and new abilities, making it incredibly deadly. Now, Supremacy Pariapuria was another fearsome addition. Its appearance has actually been greatly changed, with its body covered in blood, mainly on its claws and fangs. This monster could do almost anything. On top of being stronger and incredibly fast, it could also mix its vomit into its projectiles to cause KO and soiled at the same time, or coat itself, allowing it to inflict poison, paralysis, or sleep when colliding with a hunter. It has many new attacks that I won't go over here, but it was truly ferocious. Finally, we have Supremacy Teostra, who was also considered to be one of the more grueling hunts in the game at the time, truly considered an irredeemable bastard among the Frontier community for how ludicrously powerful it was. Similar to Hardcore Teostra, it has better control over the fire element and therefore has more powerful, faster, wider, and controlled abilities. It basically functioned in two modes, one where it acted like your typical Hardcore Teostra and an enhanced form. In this form, it'll create a giant flame tornado, jump into it, and let out a horrible screech, coming out looking like a Californian gender reveal party. Again, it has multiple new moves, and I wouldn't want to simply list them all here, but hopefully this footage gives you a good idea of what this horrible experience might have felt like. So, are you terrified yet? Supremacy was only a taste of what began to show up in G, and maybe the start of one of the big reasons Western fans don't like the idea of playing Frontier. They were incredibly difficult fights, and a hyper-reliance on the evasion skill was beginning to form around these design choices. It'll be interesting to see how this evolved within G and Z moving forward, but unfortunately, that's all I have for you today. The next part of this history series will cover the G1 to G5 updates and what they brought to the table. I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to CeraCymmetry for helping out with the script and research as well as appearing in the video itself. Again, all of their links can be found below, so be sure to check their content out. Additionally, thanks to Fist from Fist.moe and all of the community members for helping clarify certain aspects of the game. Thanks to Ascalon for helping explain features about specific updates, and thanks to Capu and Eric for providing the in-game footage. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, consider supporting the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Again, it only takes a couple of seconds and helps support me in my goal of creating this content for you all. I try to respond to every comment I can, so if you want to hear from me, be sure to let me know. Thanks so much everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.